He detested Jerry Seinfeld to his core. We now understand why. Known for his charm, humor, and sincere admiration for gifted comedians, Johnny Carson was the unchallenged king of late-night television for 30 years. With a simple gesture and invitation on the sofa, Carson launched innumerable careers, from Robin Williams to Joan Rivers. However, despite his enormous success, Carson never embraced one comedian, Jerry Seinfeld. During the heyday of television, Carson's endorsement was crucial. An unknown comic may become well known overnight with Johnny's approval. However, behind the scenes of the most influential dynasty in entertainment, Carson had a strong, unsaid dislike for the man who would go on to become the best-paid comedian on television. The guy who created late-night television couldn't stand Seinfeld, even though millions of Americans welcomed him into their living rooms every Thursday night. Today, we're revealing the details of one of Hollywood's most intriguing hidden rivalries. The cold battle between the comedian, who claimed to make a show about nothing, and television's most powerful kingmaker. What would have made Carson dislike one of the biggest names in comedy? Was it work-related, personal, or something more sinister? The response tells us a lot about males, and the true nature of entertainment after the cameras stopped filming. By the end of this video, you will know why Seinfeld never had the blessing of the man who launched the careers of innumerable comedians, and why it is more important than you may imagine. Stay with me because you have never heard the stunning truth about this Hollywood Cold War. My name is Jerry Seinfeld. Steinman, Jeannie, Sam, hello, Shoshana Lonstein, 17 and Seinfeld's connection. In 1993, Jerry Seinfeld was at the height of his popularity. Thursday nights were dominated by Seinfeld. At the age of 38, he had more influence in Hollywood than most actors could ever hope for, and critics praised him as a comic genius. What started off as a fortuitous meeting swiftly developed into a partnership that caused a stir in the United States. Even though Seinfeld maintained that they were only friends until Shoshana turned 18, the two were regularly seen together in private photos. While he was getting close to 40, she was 21 years old and not even allowed to legally consume alcohol. It seems that Seinfeld was unaware of the unease of the public. This was unthinkable for Johnny Carson. Johnny was old school about some things, according to a television insider who worked on The Tonight Show in its last years. And this got to him. Being the type of artist that parents trusted and who embodied a particular class was the foundation of his success. In his opinion, it was not only improper, but also tacky for a middle-aged guy to date a high school student. According to reports, Carson, who was in the latter stages of his career and in his late 60s, would not even bring up Seinfeld's relationship on television. Carson discreetly instructed his writing staff to eliminate any such allusions to Seinfeld's personal life after a monologue joke about the pair failed to connect with the crowd. According to a former NBC executive who worked closely with Carson, Johnny put up with a lot. One of them, however, was a 38-year-old dating a teenager. He grew up in a time when there were unspoken guidelines on how famous people should act. All of them were broken when you dated someone young enough to be your daughter, particularly if she was still in high school. The relationship was so disturbing that even mainstream media couldn't ignore it. In homage to the 1967 movie about an older woman seducing a young man fresh out of college, People magazine published a cover story titled "The Graduate." Newsweek questioned why someone with Seinfeld's degree of success and maturity would pursue someone so young, pointing out the unsavory nature of the connection. Even though Seinfeld and Lonstein parted ways after 4 years of dating, the harm to his standing in some quarters had already been done. And Seinfeld had shown himself to be anything but a gentleman in Johnny Carson's world, which still cherished discretion, class, and a certain moral code. In a rare post-retirement interview years later, Carson was questioned about Seinfeld and only responded, "Some comedians understand that great success comes with great responsibility. Others simply comprehend success." It was impossible to overlook the subtext. Whatever the person does on TV, you think, "Oh, well, he's a cab driver. I'm sure he knows what he's doing." You don't consider the haughtiness and coldness that Seinfeld displayed off camera, behind the well-known smirk and the catchphrase that cemented his fame. According to reports, the Jerry Seinfeld that America welcomed into their living rooms every week was a totally different man from the real one. People who worked with him characterized him as clinical, aloof, and frequently contemptuous of others, despite the fact that his observational comedy resonated with millions of people. Carson, on the other hand, was renowned for his sincere gratitude to those who helped make his show possible. Johnny would ask stage workers about their families, learn their names, and genuinely care about them, despite his own enormous celebrity. Carson remained remarkably grounded for someone who had achieved the height of television popularity. According to a former Tonight Show producer, who later collaborated with Seinfeld, Johnny never lost sight of the fact that television was a collaborative medium. He realized that hundreds of individuals performing their tasks properly were essential to his success. On the other hand, Jerry always seemed to be doing everyone a favor simply by being there. Backstage, many noticed the difference in the two men's methods. When Seinfeld made an appearance on The Tonight Show, Seinfeld, on the other hand, was consistently prepared, punctual, and professional. He tended to keep what one crew member described as an invisible wall between himself and everyone else, rarely interacted with employees, and rarely showed gratitude. Carson paid attention. Seinfeld's actions were noteworthy for a man who had hosted thousands of celebrities over his 30-year tenure, not because he was overtly impolite, but rather because he lacked the friendliness and modesty that Carson admired. According to a former Tonight Show writer, Johnny liked comedians who had layers. Jerry had the wit, but the rest, not so much. This became painfully evident during a comedy round discussion, where Seinfeld casually dismissed other comedians, including Carson favorites like David Letterman and Jay Leno, for making an excessive effort to connect with audiences. He appreciated sharp wit, of course, but he also valued authenticity, humility, and the ability to laugh at yourself. Those in the green room saw Carson's tight smile, while the audience chuckled at Seinfeld's trademark sarcasm. Carson had created his empire on the idea that ability should speak for itself, and as one witness stated, the audience laughed, but the green room stayed silent. Everyone knew Johnny hated that kind of talk. For a man who had survived in the competitive world of television for 30 years without making enemies, Seinfeld's attitude toward his colleagues felt needlessly sharp-edged. Johnny once told me that the mark of a truly great comedian was August the 16th to the 18th, and in Vienna, Virginia on August the 25th. He believed that self-congratulation and dismissing peers were signs of insecurity rather than confidence. 25th. Would you welcome and quickly Jerry Seinfeld? Is it that other comedians want to be around them? According to comedian Gary Chandling, who spent years with Jerry, that wasn't always the case. Seinfeld flaunted his wealth, while Carson valued modesty. Few topics more starkly reflected the differences between Carson and Seinfeld than their views on success and wealth. According to his longtime producer Peter Lasalle, Johnny Carson drove nice cars and had beautiful homes, but he lived relatively modestly by Hollywood standards. His giving quiet, his lifestyle modest, and his public persona never centered around his enormous wealth, even though he amassed a fortune estimated at over $300 million during his broadcasting career. However, he never discussed them because he thought that kind of thing was disgusting. He believed that showing off wealth was the easiest way to lose touch with your audience. In contrast, Seinfeld made his extraordinary wealth a major part of his post-sitcom persona. His private jet travel became a regular occurrence, and his collection of more than 100 Porsches became legendary. Rather than downplaying his wealth, Seinfeld seemed to revel in it, building entire shows around his collection of luxury cars, like comedians getting coffee. His $100 million annual income from Seinfeld syndication was openly discussed in interviews, and this approach embodied everything Carson found objectionable about contemporary celebrity culture. Growing up in Nebraska during the Great Depression, Carson had a Midwestern perspective on money that he carried with him throughout his life. Despite negotiating hard for his value at NBC, where he became the highest-paid entertainer in television history, he felt it was inappropriate to discuss wealth in public. A former Tonight Show staffer revealed that Johnny once told one of our writers, "You don't get funnier when your garage gets bigger," and that he thought comedy came from observation, struggle, and living a normal life. He simply shook his head when he learned about Jerry's car collection and his incessant boasting about his wealth. The great comedians Carson admired, such as Jack Benny, George Burns, and Bob Hope, all had modest upbringings and retained an everyman demeanor despite their success. To Carson, this connection to everyday life was the source of great comedy. For his generation of entertainers, there was something almost unseemly about a comedian focusing so heavily on material possessions. While younger audiences may have found Seinfeld's lavish lifestyle aspirational, Carson saw it as a disconnect from the very people who had made that success possible. Carson's perception of Seinfeld's approach as alien was a sign of a shifting entertainment landscape, where celebrities increasingly use their wealth as part of their brand. "And then you stop being funny," Carson reportedly said to his longtime sidekick, Ed McMahon. "I think that's significant, because Seinfeld made fun of Carson's chat show concept. Well, I'm here. We're all here. You're here. You're just rich. For a man who valued comedy above all else, there could be no harsher critique. When Jerry Seinfeld launched his own interview series, Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee, in 2012, he made it clear that his show was a rejection of Carson's format, a contemporary alternative to what he described as an antiquated talk show format. For 30 years, Johnny Carson refined the talk show format that would become the model for generations of hosts to follow. The monologue, the desk, the couch, the interviews. Carson transformed these elements into an art form, creating a blueprint that Letterman, Leno, and countless others would take as their own approach to talking about celebrities. I don't want to interview actors about movies I haven't seen, Seinfeld stated in several promotional interviews. That fake enthusiasm, that pretend interest, is why Comedians in Cars is the only show worth doing. Johnny took it personally, revealing a close friend of Carson's, who kept in touch with him during his retirement years. Even though Seinfeld never specifically mentioned Carson by name, but the implication was obvious to industry insiders. The traditional talk show, Carson's innovation and legacy was outdated, inauthentic, and unworthy of a real comedian's time. Carson, who is known for being sensitive to slights and fiercely protective of his legacy, was reportedly hurt by Seinfeld's contempt for the format he had spent his life perfecting. There was this guy who wouldn't have a career without the Tonight Show platform, essentially dismissing Johnny's entire life's work as fake and phony. According to a former NBC executive, Johnny saw the talk show as America's town square and took responsibility seriously. When Jerry suggested it was all superficial nonsense, that struck a deep chord with Johnny and everyone who had dedicated their lives to the format. For Carson, the talk show was more than just entertainment. It was a nightly conversation with America, a format that had seen the nation through assassinations, wars, scandals, and victories. The criticism was especially stinging because Carson had given Seinfeld a vital platform early in his career. And like many comedians of his generation, Seinfeld's Tonight Show appearances helped build a national following. To then turn around and dismiss that very format struck many of Carson's supporters as disrespectful at worst and ungrateful at best. I guess Jerry doesn't realize that without talk shows, he'd still be performing in pizza parlors in Long Island. Carson reportedly responded with characteristic understated wit when asked about Seinfeld's remarks during his retirement. But the comment, delivered with Carson's trademark twinkle, nonetheless revealed the genuine hurt behind the humor, the hole and the plug. Seinfeld's lack of emotional depth. During his 30 years on the air, Johnny Carson featured comedians who reflected the whole range of human experience. You could take the plug and shove it in the hole, which I don't even feel comfortable saying for some reason, but that would eliminate the donut. He loved Robin Williams, whose manic energy barely covered the pain and vulnerability underneath. He embraced George Carlin, whose social commentary challenged audiences to question authority and convention. And he supported Richard Pryor, whose unvarnished confessional comedy tackled race, addiction, and personal demons. Whereas Seinfeld represented the complete opposite approach. His comedy, by his own proud admission, avoided politics, emotion, pain, and personal revelation. What these Carson favorites had in common was a willingness to reveal themselves, their flaws, their struggles, and their humanity in service of their comedy. For Carson, the best humor was about connection, not just observation. He once stated in an interview, "I'm not interested in feelings. I'm interested in funny." This purposeful superficiality contrasted sharply with all that Carson valued in a comedian. And although he could appreciate Seinfeld's technical accuracy and undeniable talent, Carson felt that his work lacked the nuance that distinguished genuine artists from mere comics. According to a longtime Carson confidant, Johnny thought that while comedy should make you laugh, great comedy should also make you feel something else. He respected Jerry's craft, but he felt that his comedy only existed on the surface of life, never delving into the deeper waters where the true treasures are found. Seinfeld's approach, with its purposeful avoidance of emotional weight, struck Carson as a lost opportunity because, for Carson, who had survived highly public divorces, the death of his son, and his own struggles with alcohol, comedy was not just about escaping life's challenges, but about transcending them and turning them into something that could help others feel less alone. Seinfeld once said, "It's not my job." To Carson, who felt that the greatest comedians did just that, this statement exposed a basic misperception of comedy's potential power. When George Carlin passed away in 2008, Carson, who was then in the last months of his own life, reportedly said to a friend, "George never took the easy way. While you were laughing, he got you to think." That's the distinction between becoming a comic success and truly contributing. Although Seinfeld was not expressly the target of the remark, Carson's close associates recognized the analogy he was making. According to Carson, certain comedians have shed light on the human condition through their platform. Then there was Jerry Seinfeld, a technically excellent actor who had, in Carson's opinion, taken the easy route. "I bite a pit bull. The most valuable item I own would be that." That was the relationship between Carson and McDonald. A striking contrast. Norm Macdonald was already recognized by Johnny Carson as the comic industry's spiritual heir long before he passed away in 2005. After retiring from comedy, Carson reportedly told close friends that Macdonald was the only comic that reminded him of himself, but he made an exception for Norm. Maybe the greatest compliment the late-night king could give. Johnny saw something unique about Norm, who turned out to be a lifelong buddy of Carson's, who had stayed in touch with him throughout his last years. He believed that Norm was continuing a comic heritage that began with Jack Benny and extended beyond. Deliberate, dry, and unyielding, Johnny recognized in Norm the continuance of a family legacy that held great significance for him. Carson and McDonald's relationship contrasts sharply with Carson's emotions about Seinfeld. Jerry stood for Polishness and accuracy. Carson valued risk-takers and comedians who didn't hesitate to experiment if it meant maintaining their distinct style. Although the description seemed to contradict Seinfeld's methodical style, it was a wonderful fit for McDonald. Comedians of all ages, including David Letterman, Conan O'Brien, and Adam Sandler, paid their respects to McDonald after his death in September 2021, following a quiet 9-year fight with cancer. But one prominent voice, Jerry Seinfeld, was noticeably absent. The total lack of acknowledgement, not even a token tweet or statement, felt to many like a purposeful rejection of a comic whose approach to the profession embodied everything Seinfeld was not. Even though no one expected Jerry to pretend to a friendship that didn't exist. That silence would have spoken volumes to Johnny if he had been alive, remarked a seasoned comedian who had made appearances on Seinfeld and The Tonight Show. The silence was especially startling because McDonald had been on Seinfeld's Comedians in Cars, Getting Coffee in 2017. It would have confirmed everything he already believed about Jerry's character. Norm had shown Carson his usual candor and distinct outlook during their talk, traits that had won him over years before. However, Seinfeld made no public mention of their relationship or Norm's contribution to comedy after McDonald passed away. This absence strengthened the perception among many, who remained devoted to Carson's memory and principles, that Seinfeld lacked a spirit of generosity and reverence for comedy's traditions that had made Carson such a popular figure in the business. Although younger audiences, Seinfeld's silence for comedy's old guard may not have been noticed or cared for, but it validated a decades-long narrative about Jerry. Johnny used to say that you could tell a lot about a comedian's character by the way they discuss other comedians, recalled the previous producer of Carson. Jerry said nothing at all, by that metric. There is more to the divide between Jerry Seinfeld and Johnny Carson than a simple personality conflict between two superstars of television. It represents a significant change in American entertainment. Carson hailed from a generation that felt that popularity came with obligations to your audience, to your art, and to the people who helped you achieve. This was evident in both his broadcasting era, which emphasized a feeling of shared cultural experience, and Seinfeld's restricted casting era, which had fractured audiences and niche appeal. His dislike of Seinfeld's strategy went beyond personal grievances. It had a philosophical bent. Carson saw a new type of celebrity personified in Seinfeld, amazing technically yet emotionally cold, incredibly prosperous but spiritually distant. The fact that both individuals accomplished remarkable success, in spite of their divergent strata. Carson became America's most trusted man and governed late into the night for 30 years. In Carson's prime, Seinfeld's wealth would have been unthinkable, and he produced what many people believe to be the best sitcom in television history. Despite his popularity, Seinfeld never got Johnny Carson's blessing, which could have been the most important thing in comedy circles. According to Carson, Seinfeld continued to be an outsider to comedy's most revered traditions, even while innumerable lesser talents were given that career-changing invitation to the couch, following their stand-up performances. Technically perfect, yet lacking something crucial at its core. Carson, who once said to a friend in retirement, "There are comedians who make you laugh until you cry," may have the last word on this hidden rivalry. I'm still waiting for Jerry to make me think. Some comedians make you laugh until you ponder. The great ones do both. As viewers, we must decide which strategy has endured the most. Seinfeld's cool, detached remarks on the little things in life, or Carson's friendly, inclusive manner that welcomed everyone in America to join in a nightly conversation. Carson's idea of comedy as a unifying force seems more and more like a holdover from a different America, one that many of us are missing more and more every year in a time of growing isolation and division. For other insights into the heyday of entertainment, please press the like button and subscribe to our channel if you liked this in-depth look at one of Hollywood's most intriguing hidden feuds. Tell us what you think about Carson Seinfeld and which comedian's style most appeals to you in the comments section below. And tell us which rivalries in Hollywood you want us to look at next. We appreciate your time, and we hope to see you again soon, with more tales from the days when watching television was a genuinely national pastime.